have discussed about. So in my talk yesterday, we talked about photonic integrated circuits. So you can combine integrated optics along with MEMS to create what can be called as optical MEMS. This will be different from the conventional MEMS devices where you don't have optical elements. Another important feature of optical MEMS that I'll be discussing is that you can have light propagating in waveguides. See, in the older generation of optical MEMS, as I'll show you, they are all bulk optical MEMS. That means light is not propagating in waveguides. Okay, it will be propagating in free, like mirrors and lenses and all those things, or devices where the light is propagating in the bulk. Whereas here we'll look at what happens when light propagates in optical waveguides, how to control them mechanically, what are the different applications we can take up, and so on and so forth. Okay, so let us start with the first slide. Please go to the first slide. So this is a brief outline of today's presentation. I'll give brief introduction to the MEMS and MOEMS. A little bit of MEMS also I'll show you. Then a lot of examples, many examples for different applications. A few slides on how do we fabricate these also I have put this time. Okay, because we have not touched much about fabrication of photonic devices. Here we'll see a little bit about the fabrication issues also, and many applications. Like yesterday, we'll see applications to optical communications, we'll see applications to sensors, and so on and so forth. So once again, a little bit of work that we are doing in our lab also, I have included. Let us go to the next slide. This is a brief outline of what we do in our lab. Yesterday, I could not put this. So our main interest is in photonic integrated circuits to various applications. So we have been doing a lot of analytical work on devices, optomicrowave techniques, fiber optic sensors, optical amplifiers, and optical MEMS, and recently a little bit onto nonlinear effects, and so on and so forth, quantum and bio. These are all some of the things, but the main emphasis is on photonic devices in the integrated form. So we have a little bit of facilities for experimental test and measurement. And like as yesterday I mentioned, there is the Center for Nanoscience and Engineering in ISC, where we can fabricate many of these. We use these technologies. We have been working with lithium niobate, with titanium diffusion and proton exchange. Then we did sol gel, which we are not doing much now, but that is an important technology. And recently, silicon has become more and more important. And of course, for other applications, we have biomedical layers, some polymers, and so on and so forth. That is the brief outline of what we do in our lab. Okay, so you can please visit our lab website for details about all our TCCS projects and so on. Let us go to the first slide and the next slide. So there's a short delay in shifting from, I hope, oh yeah, now it has come. This is a chart which shows the position of MOEMS. So there are different terminologies that are used. We would like to call it MOEMS, micro opto electromechanical systems. It is also called optical MEMS in the bulk generally. And in some countries, we call it microsystem technology. Then in India, sometimes we call it smart structures. There are several terminologies. You can easily see that this is interdisciplinary, and a lot of pictures are there in this slide of actually fabricated devices and some different what is that called, the applications, and funding agencies also are there here. So this Venn diagram will represent that whatever I said, that combination of electrical, optical, and mechanical devices on the same chip. And you see this slide is taken from one of the workshops in MEMS by SPIE, where you have the University of Colorado, you have the DARPA, and so on. All these people have come together to do this. So you can understand, maybe as we go along, we'll discuss more and more about how this happens practically and how people try to realize and achieve and develop these technologies. So basically, I would like to say it is not a one person's effort. A lot of people, universities, industry, and government funding agencies have come together to build, to create this technology. At the turn of the century, there's a lot of impetus for this development. As you know, we had software industry ruling the world at the turn of the century, but then people have realized the importance of hardware, and a lot of hardware has become possible now. So hardware is also an important task right now. Let us go to one more slide. So this chart briefly shows you the worldwide growth of MEMS. You have almost an exponential growth since the last century, and it has gone up. And of course, more applications now. That pie chart, you see the market segment that is projected in the beginning of the MEMS technology. So the most important applications are in terms of the automobile applications. So pressure sensors, a lot of pressure sensors have been used for automobile applications like tire pressure monitoring, then fuel injection systems, and so on and so forth. So inertial sensors, mainly for the aerospace and space applications, also an important accelerometers, gyroscopes. These are all the devices which are going into these applications. And people have also recognized that we will have to do a lot of optical communication. So optical switching has become important. And a lot of MEMS-based optical switches people have tried to develop. Then, of course, the biomedical applications are there, which require control of fluid materials. Okay, so that is another important application. Then you have the storage, and there are many, many more consumer applications and so on. So then you also see on the right-hand side the academic work. A lot of papers have been published in the area of semiconductor sensors and MEMS in the last century. So that is also almost exponential growth because the graph is logarithmic. So you'll see a lot of papers have been published in the area of MEMS and MOEMS. Okay, one more slide, please. So brief history, if you want to look at about how this MEMS technology has grown, you have to go back to the beginning days of this technology, where, see, Richard Feynman had said that in one of these lectures, he said that you can make devices very, very small. He was looking at the quantum limits, what can be called as quantum limits. How small can we make these transistors and all these devices? So he said you can put the entire Encyclopedia Britannica on the head of a pin if you miniaturize. That is the degree of miniaturization that is possible. As you know, atomic dimensions are in the angstroms. Molecules, a few more, 10 angstroms or something like that. So those are all very, very small numbers than the common experience. Common experience is of the orders of a few millimeters and centimeters. And it is very, very difficult to go beyond a few microns. To imagine, I mean. So these are all very small devices. Maybe you can think of an optical fiber. An optical fiber is of the thickness of our human hair. That is very, very thin, you consider, is it not? But the human hair itself is of the orders of a few tens of microns, 50 microns or 100 microns. So that is also quite large. So these devices are very, very small. I mean, the VLSI technology is going to nanometers now. And MEMS is of the orders of micrometers and a few tens of micrometers. Of the orders of human hair is a very good thickness of human hair. Can you make a mirror of the size of a thickness of a human hair? Is an important question. That's where the quantum principles come into picture. You have to estimate how small they can go. Otherwise, uncertainties and all will take over. Okay? So one of the earliest device you can say is the resonant gate FET. Some of these are available as papers also in the conference papers and journal papers. You can find, if you Google search, you can see what is a resonant gate FET, how it was started, and so on. So then, of course, I have put a point on the technology part. How do we fabricate these? Is an important question. So bulk etching of silicon is an important event, you can say. So people have recognized that silicon is a good material, not only for electronics, but for mechanical applications. So this is a paper, Silicon as a Structural Material by Peterson. is an important paper in this direction. All the properties of silicon for mechanical or MEMS applications have been discussed in that. So in the beginning, the early experiments started in 80s on what can be called as surface micromachining. So you have to, everything is planar. You see, in VLSI, everything is planar, not three-dimensional. You may have more than one layer, several layers, layer over layer, but the devices are essentially in one plane. Of maybe let us say some within a small thickness of the substrate. They don't pop up or they don't operate in the y direction. Suppose if you want to call the xy direction as the direction of the plane, they don't operate much in the y direction. Maybe you will apply voltages, etc., in the y direction. But of course, in VLSI, there is no movement of the devices. Whereas in MEMS, you will have movement of the devices, as I'll show you as we go along. There is also movement along in the plane as well as above the plane also in MEMS, but still you can say very small distance above the plane. So that is what is called the planar technology. Nowadays you must be hearing about the 3D technology, like 3D printing and all that. Okay, so we can contrast with that. So the MEMS technology uses the existing technology of VLSI to improve. And of course, it is like what I did for what I said for the photonic ICs yesterday. The same argument applies to MEMS technology also. So you cannot miniaturize them too much like electronics. So that is because of the dimensions and the physical principles that govern. So let us get going. One more slide, please. So there is what is called transduction and actuation. That means you have to move these devices. So that was not available in the VLSI earlier. You can make all these devices like capacitive capacitances, then all these electrostatic movement, etc., by mechanical movement. Suppose you change the capacitance distance between the spacing between the plates of capacitor. Suppose you move them physically, then the capacitance will change. So that is one of the effects. That is an important requirement in MEMS. You will see as we go along, there are some devices where you can change the capacitance, or you can also change the resistance by applying stress fields. So these are all the things that are possible with MEMS. That's one of the earliest things that people have thought about. Electronic control of these MEMS devices. Later on, the optical control, electronic control of optical devices also has come. Okay. So then how do we remove the material? How do you manufacture? How do you see in mechanical engineering, you know that you have to machine things. That means you have to cut down the material, you have to, and so on. So how do you machine is an important point. And the solution for that is called the etching. In VLSI technology, we have what is called the etching. You can remove the material by chemical processes. Similarly, you can chemically etch out and machine these objects. So I have put in the historical development the role of the government. See, many of these is for the strategic and defense applications. So the defense agencies are very much interested to develop this and fund these programs. So government of US has played a big role in development of these MEMS structures. In fact, the same thing has happened in India also. When India wanted to develop this MEMS technology, DRDO and so on have put in a lot of effort and money to develop these technologies. They have funded many projects. So a lot of other developments have taken place. We need not spend too much time on this. Let us go to the next slide, please. So what are the various applications of MEMS that you are targeting? What are possible is an important question. So the most important application is the sensors. So sensors are required in all applications, many fields, like consumer applications, like in washing machines, then refrigerators, then door controls, and so on and so forth at consumer level. And in automobile applications, in cars, you have a lot of electronics nowadays, and sensors and cameras and so on nowadays. And you have the accelerometer bags for control. When there is an accident or impact, they can open up and protect. Then the inkjet printers people have thought about. Then the temperature sensors are needed almost everywhere. Then you we have to have proximity sensors, displacement sensors, velocity, acceleration, and all these vibration. You require sensors for all mechanical parameters. Then, of course, you have gas sensors, chemical sensors. A lot of chemicals are there around. For example, in pollution monitoring, in hazardous environments, in chemical industries, you require a lot of gas sensors and so on. At home also, the gas sensors are can detect. In India, it's not so common, but most of the new apartments in countries abroad, you have gas sensors. They can detect if there is a gas leak, or not only leakage of gas, but smelling is an important um, requirement. In food industry, for example, whether the foodstuffs are rotten, whether they are ripe, whether they are fresh, these can be detected by using the gas sensors. These are very good um, applications. So of course, I have put in between the fluid applications, which imply biomedical applications. You can detect a lot of biomedical fluids by these sensors. So in this discussion, I will not discuss too much about biomedical applications because I was told that you had the biomedical a talk on biomedicals earlier. I have also put a lot of optical applications because it's a topic on optical MEMS and also the entire FDP is on photonics. I have emphasized more on you can do what you can do is we can have an adaptive optics system. See, you just imagine what we are trying to do on an optical table. So we configure the optical table to construct many systems like a holographic system. You can make an interferometer. You can have optical communications on the optical table. All these things we are doing in a bulk. So can we translate them onto the chip is an important question. Along with the movement, yesterday we have seen that you can already make them on a small chip. But can we reconfigure them? Can we program these? Can we move these? This is a question. There's also recently a terminology called programmable photonics. That means you can reconfigure the devices on the chip and you can make a different system. Suppose you have a lens, a mirror, a beam splitter, and a detector, etc. on the chip. You can configure it for as an interferometer, different types of interferometer or a coupler. So with the same system, you can program it and do many things. That's what is meant by on the system on a programmable photonics and system on the chip. So you can do free space optical communications on the chip. For example, if you have, of course, if you have a computing system on the chip, different components on the chip can communicate with using free space. Of course, when you talk about free space optical communications, you think about communication between buildings. If you have different buildings in your campus, you can set up a free space or wireless optical link across these buildings. You don't need to lay fibers and so on. So that's one of the important domains today. And of course, these optical MEMS will be useful for that. You can align. Alignment is an important problem in wireless optical communication. If you have two different buildings, you have to align the source and detector very accurately. Otherwise, the signal will be lost in particular. So you can also use this for lasers. MEMS can be used for lasers. You can tune the cavities. You can do spectroscopy. I have also put in the end optical networks. Yesterday we have seen some optical cross connects. As an example, we have seen some optical connects. So you can use mirrors, etc. for optical networking applications. These are all the various applications you can think about with optical MEMS. Let's go to the next slide, please. So this is an example of an automobile application. There are a lot of places in an automobile where you can embed sensors and MEMS. So you see that all these parts, the circles, what you are seeing, are the places where people have possibly embedded the sensors. You have tire pressure monitoring systems. Then you have fuel injection systems. You have cameras everywhere, the doors and front side, back side, etc. There are a lot of cameras nowadays. They can also be considered as sensors. Of course, they can be infrared also. In the defense applications, you can have infrared sensors where you don't need use the physical light. They have certain advantages. You have light control for the windshield, then the fuel monitoring, then fuel injection systems in the engine. So many places you can embed sensors and MEMS. So that is the automobile. Then very important application. A lot of money is there. This is a big business, you can say, automobile industries. Okay, let us go to another slide. So this is the, I'm showing you a biomedical application. Even though you may have had earlier, just one slide about what are the various places. I want to compare with the automobile application. Like a car, you can embed sensors all over the body, both on the surface of the body as well as inside sometimes. Of course, there'll be a lot of regulations. Medical regulations are there. And for any biomedical application, they have to be cleared in the biomedical council and some of these authorities. Okay. So, but a lot of applications have problem. You are seeing one blood pressure sensor on the left-hand side with an IV line. So the blood pressure can be monitored, and also the fuel can be injected into the body when the blood pressure goes up by a certain value and all. It's a very small device. It can be put in the hand or somewhere. Sometimes a lot of things are nowadays what you call non-invasive techniques are preferred as far as possible. So a lot of monitoring can be done externally. So there are a lot of places where you can monitor. For example, I'm showing you a thigh muscle. Thigh muscle, all the strains inside the thighs would be measured by sensors over the body. You can, in fact, nowadays people call wrappable sensors or wearable sensors. You can just wear and say, for example, a band, and it can monitor. It can have a lot of sensors. It can monitor the bodily parts. Then I would like to highlight the new types of materials and devices where they can replace the bodily parts. You see, you know that a lot of pacemakers and artificial organs also are coming up nowadays. So you can have artificial muscles. Artificial muscles could be made with, of course, the materials have to be compatible with your bodily fluids and materials, but still you can have artificial muscles, for example, which can take the load. At least they can support the existing muscles. For example, for rehabilitation, if someone is recovering from sprains or strains, they can be aided by these artificial devices. You can just put them on top of your surface or externally even, and then they can do that. In the serious cases, if say, for example, like the artificial limbs, for example, you can also have artificial muscles and so on, which can support our life systems. And of course, brain is an important device where a lot of things happen, and you can monitor your brain signals and also the heart signals using these MEMS devices. Yes, please, let us go to one more slide. So defense are the people who have been supporting and sponsoring these projects. So a lot of applications to defense have come. This is a list of all those, like starting with the INS, inertial navigation systems. Then a lot of distributed sensors, both in field as well as in the aircraft and the vehicles. Then fluidic systems also are needed. In the weapons, electronic measures and countermeasures, there are a host of things, almost in all areas, like battle tanks, aircrafts. Then on the high altitudes, for example, there are a variety of requirements are there for defense applications. Okay, let us go to one more slide. So I have given you some examples of MEMS structures. I have put some examples, pictures of diaphragms, cantilever beams, gears, including the entire motor has been possible on the chip. There are a lot of mirrors on the optical devices. Then comb drives are the ones which can control these or actuate these. So these are all the examples I have put in the next few slides. Let us see. So I deliberately want to give you some mechanical structures because that is an important new thing in the optical MEMS that we are discussing now. This is a device which has got, it's a SEM photograph of a rotational to vibrational motion converter. You are seeing a wheel which is coupled to a shaft. So when the wheel rotates, the shaft can move back and forth. Or on the contrary, if the shaft vibrates, it can rotate the wheel. So that is a rotational to vibrational motion converters. So you also see certain dust mites put on this. That is the size of the objects. Dust mites are quite small, not so visible to the eye. So these are almost like a few tens of microns in dimension. Maybe let me say total can be a lot more than some 0.1 micron or 0.1 millimeters. So that's a very 100 microns is the typical size of all this. Maybe there will be some pencil or something to show the dimensions. Let us go to the next slide. So this example shows the movement, that is the requirement. This is the example which shows the gear mechanism. Gears are needed in the many machines and many mechanical systems where you can translate motion from one side to the other side. Okay, so if one wheel rotates, the movement can be translated into other. One of the points I would like you to notice here is the teeth of these wheels have to be manufactured very accurately. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Okay, so just a minute, please. So you can see what is the accuracy needed to manufacture this. So let us go to one more slide. This is a gear mechanism. So this is an example of a pop-up micromirror switch. So you are seeing a that rectangular plate. Of course, the top one is the logo of DARPA, but you are seeing a rectangular plate which is lying flat now. So when you actuate it, it can pop up and deflect light in 90 degrees. So whatever light falls on that will be deflected back. So you can use this such a system, make optical switches or maybe optical clocks. If you want to make digital optical systems, you require digital optical clocks. So you can make optical circuits, logic circuits using pop-up micromirrors. And of course, there are a lot of other applications of mirrors. Okay. Yesterday, we have seen in an example that you can use mirrors for routing applications. So I'll show some of those even now. So the mirror is lying flat, light goes straight, and when mirror pops up, the light gets deflected. Let us go to one more slide. So this is a micromirrors, example of a micromirrors. So you are seeing an array of micromirrors on a chip. They are of course lying flat, they are not popped up. And the structures, you can see the sizes of their size. They are very small, of the size of needle size. Not very small actually, compared to the VLSI circuits and electronic devices that we talk about, and even integrated optical devices that we talk about, but they're quite small compared to bulk mirrors. So they're very small mirrors. Many have been made. So I'll show you the close-up of this. Next slide, please. One more slide, please. Hello. Yes. This is a close-up of the mirror that you have seen earlier. So you see that there is a circular plate, gold coated, so that light can reflect onto that. This is mounted on a frame and it can move in 1 degree. So it can flip, rotate over a certain angle, and the entire frame can rotate another angle. That means by proper control, you can have a 3D motion. Theta and 5 degrees can be obtained. You can rotate it on a cone, you can say. So you are also seeing a lot of electrodes and other objects below. So the electrodes can be there on the substrate and also on the back of the mirrors. Also, you can apply voltages to control these. Okay, let us go. You can see the sophistication needed. How do we make this? This will be an important, interesting question. Okay, but these have been made and they are available in the practice now. You can buy some of these mirrors to whatever applications like networking or so. So very briefly, I'll show you a few fabrication process. How do you fabricate these devices? One of MEMS, you think of silicon as the fundamental material. As you know, silicon has become the most popular material for all these applications. See, you have, how do you make this is the question. In the olden days, people used to do single point diamond machining, like what jewelry people use. Of course, jewelry also now has become lithography and You can machine it more faster and quickly and more accurately. But single point diamond machining is one of the techniques for engraving and all these things. You can remove the material, even from silicon. Of course, silicon is harder material compared to gold and other materials. Bulk micro machining is one of the common techniques now. It can be used for many, many low-cost sensors. And the more sophisticated devices like the motors or the whatever you have seen earlier, mirrors, can be fabricated using what is called is surface micro machining. I'll show you some process flow next. LIGA is a German process which consists of lithography and so on and so forth, all those German names. So MEMS is a multi-user MEMS processing facility in US, where it's a commercial foundry where you can get things fabricated. If you have some device, if you want to make some pressure sensor or something according to some new idea, you can send it to MEMS and you can get it fabricated and you can use it here. You can test it here. So there will be a sequence of steps involved, and all these steps are well defined. And we have to, when we develop our process for a given application, we can keep in mind what are possibilities. What is the things that is possible? So how much is H rate that they can do? What is the size of the lithography that they can do? And all these things we need to know before we embark on your project. The same argument applies to what can be done in India. So as you know, some of you would like to come to ISC to fabricate this. So in sense, there are certain processes that are possible. So from their websites, you can know what can be possible and what is not, and you can design your device. So our ISC center also almost closely imitates the processes that are there in the MEMS. So you can make a study of what is possible and what is not, and you can design your devices. Okay, as you know, in the commercial world, we have to package all this. If you want to use them in practice, we have to package all these devices. So a lot of money goes to packaging. In fact, in VLSA also, packaging is a big industry. So of course, either before or after packaging, there's a lot of characterization and reliability studies. So some of them are online. While you fabricate, you can characterize or measure certain parameters. And finally, after actual fabrication also, you have a lot of testing in the field also. So these are all the various steps in the technological process. So a few of them we'll see, and I'll just, for description, I will highlight and we'll see what can be done. Let us go to another slide. I'm showing the example of a broad process. What are the various processes involved in MEMS and MEMS fabrication? So, of course, these are all adapted from VLSA process. You see the yellowish boxes, top boxes is the design phase. As you know, a lot of CAD tools are available now for the design. So most of the commercial ones will use the CAD tools. But if you want to, of course, even if you want to do research, you can make use of this, but you start with your original idea or the specs of the device that you want to fabricate. Then you translate them into a layout, computer layout. You can say your block diagrammatic forms, you can put it in the computer software tools available, and you can simulate how they operate and see what it does. Simulation is nothing but it's a replica of the real scenario, as close to real scenario as possible. Many times it is not possible because you do a lot of idealization. Some of the things you ignore. So when you actually do the simulation and put it in the field, it may not work. So we have to change the processes as well as your software tools or your design properly so that you get a good simulation to the real world situation. Okay. Finally, all these CAD tools will result in masks, generation of different types of masks. So the whole process goes on with respect to the masks. Several masks are made, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. I'll show you how they are used. But before that, you see the intermediate level, what you are seeing is the process fabrication sequence. That is the crux of the problem. Even though the design, etc. are also important, the core of the fabrication process or the technology lies in the fabrication. So usually it starts with a silicon wafer, Then you deposit several layers of the materials like oxide, polysilicon, etc. Or we need to define. I'm trying to tell you a broad process sequence. Later on, we'll go to specific sequence to fabricate a specific device. Then, of course, you have to transfer the patterns from this layout, whatever you have made with the CAD, onto the wafer. Typically, you make thousands of devices on the same wafer. Usually, except in some R&D, you don't use it to make only one or two devices. Okay, so you make several devices on one wafer. Then you etch out unnecessary materials and put another layer on top of that, use lithography to pattern the next pattern, and so on. It's a repeated process. Photolithography, etching, oxidation, and deposition of materials and cutting out and so on goes on over several cycles. And once all the steps are done, you need to do a little bit of checking, inspection, and then dicing them into small individual devices, then package, sealing, and all that. See, the last step is the packaging stage, where I said a lot of money is there. So we have to focus on this intermediate step. If you want to understand how these are made, we have to focus on the intermediate step. If you want to see how they operate, we have to look at their physical principles. Okay, we'll try to highlight one or two examples. Let us go to next slide. So these are the various fundamental processes that you will encounter in the MEMS fabrication process. So you have thin film deposition processes, you have got photolithographic processes, not only photolithography. Nowadays you have electron beam lithography, molecular beam lithography, direct writing techniques, all these things are there nowadays. So you have to etch out. Etching out is an important fabrication process. You have to etch out to remove materials to make the structures. So that's an important step. And also a lot of types of etching now. And then the last stage is the packaging and assembling. You can say, let us call it assembling. How do you assemble all this? You see, it is not like assembling a wristwatch. It's not like assembling a conventional mechanical structure. So it has to take an automatic process. Sequence of steps have to be designed such that automatically the device gets in place. We cannot assemble a MEMS structure like a wristwatch. They are too small to do that. Of course, wristwatch itself is a very, very fine technology. Many expert, skilled craftsmen, they will very quickly assemble and deassemble a wristwatch. It's not possible for common people to do that unless you have a small training. So these various techniques are listed down under each of these. Okay. So let us go to one more. Next slide, please. And we go to the next slide. Yes. So I'm illustrating the use of this process using one example. So this is called the bulk micromachining. This technology can be called as bulk micromachining. So this is what you are seeing is a cross section of a device. You can see the last picture in this. So you have two parts of this with a gap in between. So on the left hand side, you have one part and the right hand side, another part. Each one has got several layers shown in different colors. So let us assume this is an optical device where the greenish portion you will inject light from the input and it passes through the gap and comes out of the output portion. So if there is any force on top of one of these portions, then there's a mismatch between the input and output fields. You can calibrate it against the force or pressure or whatever parameter. So that is the idea behind this device. In order to fabricate this device, what do we need? So you look at now the first step. You start with a silicon wafer and with both sides oxide coated. Nowadays you get them commercially also, oxide coated silicon wafers. And you can etch out a small region in the silicon, I'd say bottom side. Many of the technologies as you know in VLSI also are bottom up. On the bottom side, you diffuse or implant or whatever you want to do. On the top side is held. Okay. And at the bottom side, you etch out or do all the processes. So you etch out a small rectangular or circular region, or a slit type of region in the wafer in the bottom side. Then you use a chemical etching, very dilute KOH can be used for etching out that pattern, whatever you see. You can call it as a diaphragm, like a tabla surface. Okay, so this is very quite thin. Maybe depending on your design, depending on the force that it has to take, you can make it as thin or as thick as possible. Typically, of the order of a few tens of microns, let me say 20 microns is a typical example. So once again, you coat another layer of oxide on top of that. Oxidation of silicon is well known. So you can coat another layer of oxide on top of that. And you coat nitride, which is quite thick. Its refractive index is also quite high, so that you can form cladding layers of the optical devices. So you are trying to make an optical device. So a full layer of that oxide will make optical waveguide. Okay, so then you have to etch out a slit. So for that, use an aluminum mask. You coat an aluminum on top of this, and then using lithography, you etch a small slit type of region, and then you use what is called deep etching, deep and reactive ion etching. It is called deep reactive ion etching to make this slit. That is very, very crudely, very briefly how you will do this. So you start with the silicon wafer, etch out a diaphragm, then you put a oxide layer for the substrate, then you put a oxynitride layer for the waveguiding region, and then use an aluminum mask and etch out through. So one of the features in this process, which you call as bulk micromisting, is the silicon itself is acting as a structure and a few layers above and below, optical layers. So that is an important feature of bulk micromisting. You need the properties of silicon, like the strength, your refractive index, your Young's modulus, and all these properties of silicon are important in the design of this device. Let us go to one more example. This is an example of making a cantilever beam on a silicon using what can be called as surface micromisting. One of the important features in surface micromisting is you will use polysilicon layers, not silicon, but polysilicon layers as the structure. So the important properties of polysilicon are important here. So you can see the last picture now. So you have a silicon substrate on which you have a silicon nitride thin layer, so that the polysilicon will adhere to that, and you can make a floating type of beam. Okay, how do you make that is an important feature. So let us start with how do you do this. You look at the first picture. You start with a silicon wafer, put a thin layer of nitride. On top of that, you put a layer of oxide. The red one is oxide, and etch out a small region for the polysilicon to hold there, and then coat uniformly the polysilicon on top of that, and finally etch out the oxide region. You can etch out oxide in different ways. So the oxide is called the sacrificial layer. You are just simply sacrificing that to make the polysilicon structure. So this is the very crudely, very briefly, the mechanism of how the surface micromisting goes. Finally, you get a floating beam. So you can apply forces on top of that. You can make electrical components like resistors on top of that. You can make optical components like mirror on top of that. All those things I'm not showing. I'm just showing you the making of a cantilever beam. Cantilever beam itself is an important device. For example, there is a gap between the cantilever beam and the substrate. If there is a force on top of that, and if you use control electrodes on these substrate as well as the beam, you can make it as a capacitance sensor. Or if there is a force on top of that, you can measure the force by using the capacitance effects. All these things are possible. There are a lot of ideas. See, the ideas in sensors are many more compared to the ideas in communications, because a lot of standardization has gone into communication. For example, if you take the 5G or some such standards, a lot of things are almost predefined. Of course, if someone is trying to do R&D or research, then you don't need to follow too many restrictions or conditions or standards. Of course, because we have to buy this equipment from some standard vendors, we have to stick to some standards. But you have a lot of flexibility if you want to invent something new. Okay, let us go to some more examples. So these are two examples of fabrication that I've shown. So one more example of a fabrication of a more sophisticated device like a micromotor. You see in the picture is a micromotor. I'm trying, these are all the steps which are typical of MEMS. I mentioned earlier, multi-user MEMS processing facility. So if you want to make a motor, there are several steps needed. I'm showing you 7 steps. Maybe 14 steps or 20 steps are needed to make this motor. So the last picture will show you the cross section, how it looks. Okay. So the reddish portion in between, that is the medium. That is the medium which rotates, the polysilicon medium. Reddish is the polysilicon. The orange is the orange is also a metal. Let us look starting with the first step. You start with silicon substrate, a thin layer of poly on top of that. That is also of course, in this particular case, it is not a moving medium, but it takes the adherence and all these things of the other layers. And then you have a nitride layer on top of that. And then in the second step, you see that there is an oxide layer coated on top of this. The yellowish one is the oxide, and 2 dents are also seen there. Using lithography, you make 2 dents. So those are the places where the motor will be held. Okay. Then on top of that, you coat the first layer of poly, the reddish layer, which will go into the main structure. That middle 2 rectangular portions are the ones which can move. Okay. Of course, if you see the top view, you will know how it can move. There's a good theory about how these motor can be moved on the silicon chip. In the 4th step, you see that there's one more layer of oxide that is coated, and it will cover the metallic regions. It will cover the reddish metallic regions. The reason, the requirement for that is you would like to etch out these yellowish oxide region, the first layer of oxide. So you remove the middle region where you are seeing that orangish region that can be adjacent to that can be removed. And then more lithography can be done on top of that. That one more small yellowish regions outside are removed. And finally, the greenish region is also removed here. So by the time you come to the last step, the motor is in place. This is what is meant by calling auto assembly. The beginning, I said you cannot assemble a MEMS structure like a wristwatch or some other machine. So this is an example where you can make the entire motor. By the time you come to the last step, you have the motor in place. How it operates, how it moves is another story. That also we will discuss if necessary. So the voltages are applied to all. There are a lot of electrodes which are not shown here. You can apply successively to different parts of this motor so that it moves. Okay, but here I'm trying to I emphasize on how it can be fabricated, how a sophisticated device like a motor can be fabricated. Okay, let us go to next slide. So this is another example of a micro mirror. So it's not exactly same as motor, but still the processes involved in that can be applied to this. The oxide layers, etching out of sacrificial layers, polysilicon layers, all those things are similar to that. So mirror is a polysilicon structure. On top of it, you coat the gold for reflection. And of course, you are seeing certain gap. There are a lot of mirror structures are there, like torsional mirrors and so on and so forth. So these all can be fabricated with the MEMS type of process. This is just as an example. Yeah, also you see also this sacrificial layer, that yellowish one in between bulk is an oxide layer. Okay. Similarly, on the top of the mirror, the poly 2 layer also is a gold that is coated. So the mechanical properties will depend on the poly, whereas the optical properties will depend on the reflection properties of this gold. Let us go to another slide. So now we'll come to waveguide based optical MEMS. Until now, we have seen that light is propagating in uniform space between mirrors or so on. So we have seen devices which are based on bulk MEMS. Now we can see how to combine optical MEMS and integrated optical devices. A lot of applications are there. So we can call them as guided wave optical MEMS rather than bulk optical MEMS. Let us start with the next slide. So this slide will show you, like yesterday, I think I have shown you this application, various applications of optical MEMS. There are two broad range of applications, one for the power control and one for the networking applications. A power control is needed in biomedical and many applications where you want to control how much light is propagating and so on and so forth. On the networking applications, you are more interested in protecting the devices. So whether light propagates in control of the devices, where light propagates in a particular direction or not. You are seeing the first one is an example of 1x2 optical switch made by Lucent. A small mirror is placed or inserted into the in between two optical fibers so that the light gets deflected 90 degrees. That is the functioning of a 1x2 optical switch. When there's a mirror in place, then the light gets deflected. When you move out the mirror, the light will go straight. So 1x2. Similarly, you can make an optical add drop modules. Then you can also, I have shown you these mirrors. People have made 256 by 256 array of optical mirrors. Okay. So the right one, which you are seeing, is called a variable optical module attenuator. So you can control the amount of light intensity. Okay. You can control a lot of parameters of light, like polarization, or you can also control the phase of the light using these structures. Well, let us go to one more slide, please. So this is one of the dramatic developments in optical MEMS. On the left-hand side, you are seeing a conventional optical bench where you put all these stands on mirror, and on the top of that, you mount these lenses, mirrors, prisms, and all these bulk optical components. So on the right-hand side, what you see is the silicon wafer, the same optical bench made on a silicon wafer. You once again see the flanges, like you see the Fresnel mirror, then you have a beam splitter. All these things are made on a silicon wafer of very small size. They both are not exactly equivalent, but I'm just showing you, you can make a lot of components which you see on an optical table on a silicon wafer. Of course, because we are using silicon, we cannot make laser or a photo detector or some active devices on the same substrate. But still, you can have a lot of control. Mechanical control is achieved by using these optical MEMS. You also avoid the problem of alignments and so on and so forth, which are needed in practice. If you package it well, you can take this into a field and use it. Okay, for example, if I want to construct a Mag-Zehnder interferometer and configure it for some holography application, I can do it like this on the chip. Of course, the power levels and some difference will be there, but the functionality can be similar to what we can get on a optical table. So this is called a micro optical bench. It has come in one of the papers, like in the last before, I think in 1996 or sometime like that. So people have made a lot more progress in this direction. A lot of things can be done. Of course, where you apply, etc., is to be important requirement. Okay, let us go to one more slide. I want to show you some optical guided movements. Let us go to the next slide. So these are all the various components that people have made on an optical bench, starting with the mirrors, beam splitters, lenses, actuators, and entire systems, what I'm showing you there. So these are all things that some of you can also see that some of the, these are all SCM photographs, what you can call. And in the last picture, you see that light is deflected in some mirrors it's not. Some mirrors are lying flat, some mirrors are popped up and they're deflecting light. Like I think we already discussed about how this can be used in a network. Okay, let us go to one more slide. So this is a scanner that people have made at UCLA using polysilicon surface micro machined structures. You have two flanges you are seeing, two mirrors you are seeing, one for horizontal scanning and one for vertical scanning, each of the size of some 300 microns. It's quite large only. Actually not very small, but from bulk point of view, they're quite small. You can get 40 degrees of movement in one mirror and 20 degrees in the other. You can combine these so that you have a three-dimensional motion. Originally, people have thought that these mirrors can be used for display applications. You can deflect the light in different directions and make optical displays for some, like what we see nowadays with the outside. You see a lot of displays like LED displays and so on. You have similarly, people have thought that these can be used for displays, but of course now the more sophisticated applications are possible now. Okay, let us go to one more slide. Yeah, this actually I have described earlier. This 2x2 fiber optic switch, and you have on the right hand side you see 8x8 micromirror switch array, where you can direct input light beam into any direction that is possible. So a lot of engineering issues have to be solved in optical MEMS. The scalability is one of the important problems. You want to make the bigger and bigger arrays. And loss is another problem. Yesterday I did not highlight in integrated optics, but now because you're talking about the bulk MEMS, you see that loss will be important from the input to output. Light will diverge and you will not get the same intensity at the output. And the fabrication process is not the same as exactly same as VLSI, but some modifications have to be done. That is another challenge depending on the device. So the reliability of mechanical motion and all these things, many issues are there to be solved in these applications. Okay, so I'm only highlighting some important principle and how they function. Let us go to one more slide. So now I'll show you some structures where you combine optical waveguides on silicon with MEMS that you can have. So what parameters of the light can you? Is an important question. You can control any parameters of the light, like intensity, phase, polarization, direction of propagation, and so on and so forth. They require different systems, different materials, and different ideas, different structures to do that. So given a function, you can easily come up with an idea how you can do that. Suppose I say I want to control the phase. So you can imagine what is the device that can do that. Okay. Sometimes there are multi-purpose devices like the directional coupler we talked about yesterday can do many things. Okay. So let us see some examples. Next slide, please. So this is one of the earliest papers on optical waveguide based device. You see a cantilever beam, mechanical structure, on which there is an optical waveguide that is made. Of course, the gap is quite large. You see a cantilever beam, there is a gap, and then once again, optical waveguide on the substrate. Like the first example that I used for describing the bulk optical MEMS. So light, you can inject light to the input waveguide, and then you can measure it the output waveguide, and you can apply a force on top of the cantilever beam, and there is a mismatch. It can be very sensitive. Very small quantities of small pressure values can be measured by using such a cantilever based structures. Okay, so of course there are a lot of mechanics involved. You have to solve the mechanics of this, then the optics of this, and so on. Of course, I am not showing you the electronic control. A lot of electronics is needed for control these devices, so that I'm not showing directly here. So let us go to one more slide, please. So this is the cross section of that device, what you are seeing there. So there is a cantilever beam on top of that and a substrate, and there is an oxide on the. First of all, you take the substrate, put an oxide on top of that, you make the cantilever. In fact, you know that we have used oxide layer as a sacrificial layer. You don't etch out the entire layer so that it forms as a gap. There is a gap between the top cantilever beam and the optical waveguide which you are seeing there. So when such a thing happens, in fact, actually you can make another optical layer on top of the below this cantilever also. When you actually etch out, you need not etch out fully from both the top cantilever beam as well as the substrate. So there is a optical waveguides on the cantilever beam as well as on the substrate, and light can propagate in these, and you can change, you can apply force and then make them couple. It's like the directional coupler we talked about. The spacing between the directional coupler can be controlled by applying pressure on top of this cantilever beam. So you can get a mechanical control of the directional coupler as the example. So the fields will interact. The field propagating in the first waveguide and the second waveguide and their modes and so on will interact, and exchange of power can take place. A lot of interesting devices can be made by using such an evanescent fields. So let us go to the next slide, please. So this example I have shown you earlier, yesterday. So these are Moen pressure sensor that Dr. Patnaik has made. Once again, I'll very briefly describe here. The important feature that to highlight is the diaphragm. We are using a diaphragm, mechanical diaphragm, to control the one arm of the interferometer. So this, as you have seen today, this diaphragm can be made by bulk etching of silicon, and when you apply uniform pressure on top of this, only the first arm of the interferometer is affected. There's a phase shift in that, and there's no phase shift in the bottom waveguide. And when they combine, you get a sinusoidally varying intensity of the light. So you can measure the phase by this way also. This is an example. So in order to do this, a lot of mathematics is involved. At that time when we did this project under National Program on Smart Material and Structures, all the software tools are not available. We had to solve all these things by hand. The mechanical equations and the optical equations and so on. Of course, they're all available in papers and books. It's not very difficult. If someone wants to do a project or thesis or research on these subjects, very interesting. You have, of course, you should be very good at your mathematics. And also, of course, nowadays you have the support of these software tools. The same argument that applies that I mentioned earlier about the software tools are applicable here also. You should be very, very cautious in using these tools, whether they are applicable, whether you get the correct results, etc. You have to carefully ensure before you do that. Let us go to its principle of operation. How did we did? Okay, this is the analysis methodology. Because some people will be interested in doing research in this subject, I have put some equations. So for those who are not comfortable with mathematics, you may close your eyes for a few minutes. So the analysis methodology consists of solving the mechanical equations for the cantilever beam or diaphragm, whichever structure you use. And in this particular case, I'm using the diaphragm. So you need the equations of the diaphragm. If you are using a cantilever beam, you require mechanical equation of cantilever beam. You can just start with normal differential equation, the mechanical, like Newton's laws or something, or you can also put in the operator form, like people use the Lagrangian form in mechanics, etc. So you can talk to some mechanical engineers. They can tell you a lot about how this classical mechanics is used for the dynamics of cantilever beam, diaphragms, etc. I think the mechanical engineers study very well within the BTech courses. So from once you solve these mechanical equations, you get the equations for the displacement of the diaphragm or cantilever beam and the corresponding stress involved. So as you know, once you apply forces, pressures, etc. on the silicon, there will be a lot of stress induced, not only physical movement, there will be a lot of stress. All this can be solved. So you can relate the displacement and stress fields mathematically. Then, of course, once you get the stress involved, you can relate it to the just a minute, please. So you have to solve. You see, you have to relate it to the optical properties and mechanical properties. So the stress will induce the refractive index change. This is called the elasto-optic effect. And once you know the refractive index profile, the variation of refractive index with the distance, with coordinates and so on, then you can study how the light propagates. You can solve the wave equation, waveguide properties, modes, all those things you can solve. And as you have just seen, these are related to mechanical properties. So that's how you can interlink mechanical and optical properties, and you can solve these problems. And of course, you can have a lot of options. Different types of structures are possible. Mechanical structures, optical structures also many you can think of, like the waveguides, couplers, and so on and so forth. And even the more sophisticated structures, like yesterday we talked about photonic bandgap structures. You can also create photonic bandgap structures and control them mechanically. In one of our projects earlier, we have done that. Okay, let us go to one more slide. So this is the mathematics of all that diaphragm. You have del power 4 equations for displacement. Omega is the displacement, and you can solve by various means. A lot of differential equations theory is already available. And if you see some mechanical book like, I don't remember the name of the standard book, you can get all these properties. Okay, let us go to one more slide. So for the time being, you just see that there are a lot of good mathematics there. These are all the various parameters that we use. In fact, in particular, the displacement can be expressed as a linear superposition of many solutions, like the solutions due to the moments along the edges and so on and so forth. And you can solve for the displacement, total displacement of the diaphragm. Okay, let us go to another. One of the things that you should note is that the effect is very small. So very small changes in the displacement or so on are possible, and very small changes in the refractive index are possible. But optical effects are very sensitive. So even small changes are sufficient, and you get very sensitive devices to make. Okay, and also I'm showing you in this you have to do normalization. All these equations you cannot solve as it is, but you have to normalize. Okay, because otherwise there will be a lot of parametric equations like in transistors. So you can relate. That's the last few equations will show you how you relate the displacement to the stress fields. See, just a minute, because we are using silicon, which is an uniform material. There is no nonlinearities, there is no anisotropy, and all those things, both from mechanical point of view as well as optical point of view. But due to the application of stress, etc., there is a lot of anisotropy that has come into picture. So the stress values are different directions. Maybe you can say that silicon has different mechanical properties in different directions. Even though it's a uniform material, depending on the direction you apply, the atoms are stretched in those directions, and you have the corresponding stress fields. Okay, so that's an important thing. You see, you are getting into a graded index in optics. You have what are called the graded index wavelengths, graded index fibers, and so on. So in the wave equation, this goes in the form of the refractive index profile. So the refractive index is a function of x, y, z. So your equations, these optical equations are equations with variable coefficients, not constant coefficients, not nonlinear still, but they vary with the distance. So this is a problem. So definitely you have to have approximation techniques, software tools, and all those things to solve these problems. Okay. Let us go to further, next step. So this I'm showing you an optical analysis. This is very simple. See, if you have seen yesterday's, if you have followed, then you can do a lot of optical wavelet theory. A lot of techniques are also there now, like beam propagation method, coupled mode theory, and all these theories can be applied to study the propagation of light waves in these optical structures. So when say delta phi, for example, I'm showing you delta phi is variation with length as well as propagation constant. So in general, you can say that the displacements are very small, but the stress-induced changes in the refractive index are very large. So you call it as photoelastic effect or elasto-optic effect. So the refractive index change due to the stress can be quite significant. That's what I would like to say. And so it converts into what is the phase shift. So delta L is small, delta phi can be large. Okay. So let us go to another slide. So a lot of MATLAB and these charts we have programmed all these things. If someone is interested, they can take from us. So mechanical, I'm highlighting mechanical coupling here. The refractive index change is depending on the coefficients C1, C2, C3, C4, which relate the stress fields to refractive index variations. Because stress fields are anisotropic, they are different in different directions. So delta N is also different. In the silicon, you have got the anisotropic properties for optical propagation. Finally, of course, in more all these, if you are trying to do a sensor application, you are interested in sensing. What is the sensitivity? What is the change in the phase that is possible for unit change in the pressure? That's how you define the sensitivity. And you can evaluate and study that with respect to various parameters and all that. That is what is being done in our project. Okay. Yes, please. Next one. So these are some of the parameters that we have used. Of course, we have used, at that time, there are no software tools, and also we are trying to target the fabrication. So we have chosen big structures, say 5 millimeters is the size of the diaphragm. In fact, we would like to have a long waveguide. That's why we made diaphragm also longer, and the corresponding pressure values, typically of the orders of kilopascals or even up to megapascals. We can go with these type dimensions. Okay. So of course, we have chosen the silicon and silicon nitride as a system. So the corresponding properties will be important. And you have to take the corresponding coefficients, elastic coefficients. Okay. Let us go to another slide. So these are all MATLAB plots of variation of the stress variation along different directions and so on. Okay. Let us go to some of our people have used mathematics also. So you see how the refractive index changes with respect to pressure. So how the phase changes with respect to pressure, all these things are studied there. I have shown you yesterday also this one. Typically, you can get a sensitivity of the orders of 100 microradians per kilopascal. So that is the orders of magnitude that are possible. And these mechanical structures are quite stiff. So you can go up to several hundreds of megapascals or even a gigapascal in some, depending on your size of the structure. So they are very strong, and very small changes are sufficient to make them sensors. That is what I would like to mention here. Let us go to one more slide, please. So a lot of CAD tools are available nowadays for all these applications. MEMCAD is one of the standard tool from Coventroware. Some of them are merging. In fact, sometimes some people see all these software tools have been developed based on some researchers. Someone has worked on these in some universities, and then they have converted all their theories into CAD tools. That's what is happening. Actually, in India, there's a lot of capability for all this development of software tools. In fact, our country should export. We should develop and export a lot of these CAD tools, because people are quite good at mathematics and theory, and you don't need big infrastructure. So we should target some of the people who are participating in this FDP should think of making a startup on software tools for either for photonics or CAD or MEMS. You see, because one other important problem for us is to acceptability. See, outside people who want to do this have to accept this. So you can, there's another intermediate way. You can tie up with these people who are already big people who are in this software, in this CAD tools domain. And then you say that your tool doesn't do this particular job. So we have developed it, and you sell them. So we have to commercialize our technology, our ideas. You can patent and so on. I hope some of you will do that in future. So a lot of tools are there for different applications, for MEMS applications, for all the last things that you see, or for optical applications. ANSYS is a mechanical tool. Multiphysics tools are there. Then many of these people, they conduct workshops on how to use these tools, sometimes free also. So you can have a look at, you can watch out for these workshops on utilization of these tools. Okay. So BPM CAD is a tool for light propagation, ZMAX for the light lenses and all those things. So you can combine whatever is necessary for your application and then use them. Okay. Of course, we have to test with some small example. Always in any CAD tool, you choose some small example and then test it. That is an important requirement. Okay. So otherwise, we don't know whether we are getting good correct result or not. Okay, this we have already seen the fabrication. We don't need. I think we are coming to the close of my talk. So there are a lot of ideas I have given to you. There are a lot of ideas which you have not explored. Some of our students have come up with these ideas, but they have not solved. Okay, so instead of using a cantilever beam, you can use a diaphragm. A lot of optical devices are possible. Then you can also do, like, if you are good at control systems or something, you can, like in the control systems, we can use the harmonic analysis. As you know, we do harmonic analysis. So the inputs, the frequency doesn't change, and you can do impulse response, then step response, and so on and so forth to study how stable these devices are. A lot of studies can be done, noise studies can be done. Optical side also, you have a lot of options. Like this, I'm showing you the directional couplers. So like that, there are many ideas which can be used for making new optical structures. Let us see if there's anything important, otherwise we'll conclude. So I'm showing you various examples that we have done, some of our students have done. So this is the modes of vibration of cantilever beam that we have studied. Okay, let's go to another one. This is the cantilever beam mode of the frequency and how it happens, length of the beam versus this thing. So this is a change the refractive index with the various values of the force that you apply on a cantilever beam and so on. So this is for different spacings of the directional coupler. You can have different outputs curves, so you can calibrate. Okay, so these are all some points that we have noted for different modes of vibration, the zero crossings, poles and zeros, and all these things we have studied in some of our theses in our previous works. So other ideas, this is an accelerometer that Dr. Jagannath Naik has done this in one of our students who are done on accelerometers. Of course, now they are trying to fabricate this and try to put it to use. I'll show you one. These are all ideas which you can explore. Interferometer you can use, directional coupler you can use, you can combine them. All these things can be done. Yes, please. One more finally. Last slide I can see. Yeah, this is a chart showing specs for a typical accelerometer that Dr. Jagannath Naik has done. So various parameters that you will require. Typically, you can go in the accelerometer and force, you can go up to sub-micro G. If you want to go for very small values of acceleration or vibration, then this seems to be the best. He has made it for the automobile applications, what is needed, for navigation applications, what is needed. If you want to do three-dimensional sensing, how to do, whether they will couple between different directions. So these are all the studies that we have done. Okay, yes. I think that's all. Last slide we can go maybe to conclude. So all these slides are available to you. You can go through them. A lot of charts, because this is a thesis work. He has generated hundreds of plots of various modes, changing the parameters and all that. So these are noise studies, because we found that thermal noise is important. You see, mechanical thermal noise, not detector noise. So due to the temperature changes in some random way, you get a lot of very interesting phenomena. So the sensitivity is limited by this noise of these devices. So these are new things which have come out because of the MEMS. So we have used the same ideas that we have in communications. In electronics and communication, we study a lot of noise, random process and all that. So we have applied our ideas into optical MEMS and try to study how sensitive they are and all that. Yes, please. So a lot of comparisons are there between different types of accelerometers. All this towards the last, what I hope it is Dr. Jagannath Naik's work. He has made different types of cantilever beams and how sensitive they are and what is the range of values that are possible. All these things have been studied. So in the conclusion, I can say that a lot of optical MEMS is based on the bulk optics, like mirrors and all these things for networking applications are all bulk optical MEMS. So there's a problem of power wastage in that. So you can go for integrated optical MEMS, where light propagation, optical waveguides, and can be controlled much better. And I can say nowadays a lot of software tools are available and programs are available. MATLAB programs are available, done by different people. They are there in the papers as well as with us. They're all available on the web also. You can search some university websites, you can download these. And of course, softwares are available for conventional as well as modern optics. Okay, yes. See, a lot of new applications are there. I'm not highlighting. I have highlighted only some principles. So you can see these journals. Like yesterday, I have collected a few. There are a lot of special issues for journals like JSTQE, Journal of Special Topics, Quantum Electronics. This is a specialist journal. Like many of you, if you are IEEE members in communication or signal processing, you know there are special topics journals. In fact, in IEEE, this is the first journal, special topics. Every 2 months you get it. Every issue is a special issue. Some issues are on optical MEMS, some on lasers, some on biomedical applications, new areas, wireless communication. So many things are coming up in these journals. So I hope once again, like yesterday, I would suggest you to become members of IEEE Photonics Society to get all this information. In fact, if you are interested in sensors, there is what is called a Sensors Council. So that is also like almost like a society, but you need not join that separately. If you are a photonics member, you are automatically a member of sensors. Similarly, there is a Sensor Systems Council. A lot of things are available. So I hope you have enjoyed this talk and you have got useful information. Of course, I will answer questions if you have, and a lot of things to explore. If you are really interested in photonics and optical MEMS and all that, you can, a lot of information is available. You must study systematically. This lecture will only give you some motivation and some overview. You have to go systematically. And of course, I would like to once again emphasize, of course, I have not put in these 2 lectures, but you have to use mathematics to study this. If you are not able to express or analyze the problem, we are not understanding. It's only like a story. There's no use just by listening like a story. Nowadays, as you know, a lot of webinars and online lectures are there, but they will only motivate you to study. You have to study yourself. 90% of the effort has to come from internally from ourselves. Then only we'll understand all this. Otherwise, some of the topics like quantum communications or so are very, very difficult just by listening to a lecture. Okay. So mathematics is definitely needed to understand all these things. So please don't ignore that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Dear participants, we are now open for questions. Kindly unmute yourself and you can ask your question.
Good morning, sir.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. Sir, this is Jyotiranjan from
Yes.
Gandhi Institute of Technology, Bhubaneswar.
Yes.
Sir, how do I become a member of Photonic Society of India? Will you please guide me?
Yeah. Very briefly, I'll tell you. Later on, if you want, I will communicate separately. You have to go to IEEE.org. That is the website for the IEEE. So in that, there are so many societies. If you go to societies, then you have all these 39 societies. And they will show you what is the fees and all those things. For IEEE, for example, maybe you may be interested in the fees also. So first of all, before you do all this, you have to make your own account in IEEE with your username as the, your email as the username and some password. First, you have to create your account with all the information about your college, your interests and all that. Then on the right hand side, you will have a icon to join IEEE. So once you click that, it will ask you what society you want to join, where what discount you want to apply and all that. So final information for you is that the membership is $79 for IEEE and $10 for photonics. That's all, $89 total. I would suggest you to join after August 15th because the membership will come for the next year. Whole of this August, September, October, November, and December, it's included. You get free as a bonus. So $79 plus $10 for photonics. So that is the thing. And you please claim all the discounts. Only when you get the correct value. See, in US, the fees is double, $158 plus $20. But if you claim discounts, you get $279 plus 10. Please explore properly. And maybe the organizers can make a small handout about how to join IEEE Photonics Society. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for your interest. If you want to start the student branch in your organization also, please let me know. We can help you. Of course, whatever information that we told you is only for the faculty members. For the students, it is $27 plus $10. And if you want to make a Photonics Society chapter in your college, you require 6 students and 1 faculty member. And you should also already have an IEEE student branch. So a lot of possibilities are there. There are a lot of members in this group also, I suppose, where there are Photonics Society chapters. In Karnataka, we have several, about 10 or so chapters. And all over India also, there are almost some 35 chapters are there of Photonics Society. So there's also I would like to mention, there is what is called a Prakash Bharati group, online group. where members can, a lot of information about the upcoming conferences, news, and so on are exchanged. So please join. All the faculty members, I will request you to join Prakash Bharati Photonics group. That is a Prakash Bharati is a group of photonics members. That's all. You can have your own individual chapters, but you can, as a national level, you can take part. Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, sir.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
In directional coupler, you told you have excited higher order modes.
Yes.
So
It is possible.
how many modes we can excite in that directional coupler?
See, the conventional directional coupler is single mode. Only one mode is possible. Of course, I have not mentioned that you can, in these examples, I have not mentioned, but definitely you can excite more than one mode, two modes or three modes, depending on your requirement. Suppose you want to make a mode splitter. Suppose there is a waveguide is containing two modes, mode 1 and mode 2. You can make mode 1 go into the first port, mode 2 into the second port by choosing the second port appropriately. You only have to match the propagation constant. If the beta of the second waveguide matches with the first waveguide, you can tap the first mode. If the beta of the second waveguide matches with the second mode, you can tap the second mode. So this is very important. Recently, the mode division multiplexing, what is called, has become important. Multimode, MIMO in optical domain. Then you need all these multimode devices. Yes, please.
So there is a single waveguide structure. So
Yes.
we need to change that structure for exciting higher order modes, I think.
Yeah. If you want to excite higher order modes, the waveguide should support so many modes, whatever number. Suppose you want to waveguide to support 10 modes, you can excite 10 modes. Suppose you have the input waveguide is a single mode, but you want to taper it into a broad waveguide which can support many modes. So this fundamental mode gets converted into all the higher order modes. So you can manipulate those higher order modes.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, any more queries? Okay, we'll proceed then. Thank you so much, sir, for this informative session on.
Yeah, thank you very much also for inviting me to your program. And also I'm very much thankful for RNS for conducting this FDP on photonics. Okay, of course, nowadays, a lot of people are interested in photonics and they're conducting FDPs. But of course, you have grouped a lot of interesting topics in your FDP. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Dear participants, kindly make sure that you enter the attendance or the feedback form every day after each session, okay? Because this is going to be considered for the attendance. All right, and we will come back again for the next session, which is the session on nanophotonic devices at 11:45. Thank you. Kindly note that the link for the session has already been shared in the WhatsApp group. Thank you.